It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday in Brentwood, a quiet morning in a neighborhood where the rich and famous enjoyed privacy, sunshine, and manicured lawns. But for the Reiner family, that morning would shatter every illusion of safety, stability, and trust. Rob Reiner, the legendary Hollywood director, and his wife Michelle were found stabbed to death in their $13.5 million estate. The discovery wasn't made by authorities or a neighbor, but by their daughter Romy, who stumbled upon a scene so horrifying it would haunt her for the rest of her life. Police say that Romy immediately mentioned a dangerous family member, a cryptic warning that would turn the investigation into a labyrinth of secrets, betrayal, and suspicion. And then there was Nick, the Reiner's son, found in the guest house, arrested the same night, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. But what was happening behind those walls? Who could have committed such a violent act and why? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The first thing you need to understand is the scale of this story. This isn't just a crime story. This is a tragedy set against the backdrop of Hollywood glitz, fame, and family legacies. Rob Reiner, 78, has been a household name for decades, celebrated for classics like When Harry Met Sally and The Princess Bride. He's known for his humor, his sharp intellect, and his public persona as a loving father. Michelle, 70, was the heart of the family, a woman whose warmth and dedication held the household together. They were, by all appearances, a family that had it all: wealth, success, and influence. And yet, behind the carefully curated image, there were cracks. Fractures that may have gone unnoticed until tragedy struck. How could a family that seemed so perfect harbor the kind of darkness that leads to murder? Think about this. When a family is ripped apart in such a violent way, the first question is always why. Was it money? Was it revenge? Or was it something even more sinister, something that can only be understood by looking closely at relationships, psychological patterns, and hidden resentments? In the Reiner case, all these elements appear to collide. Nick, 32, the son who lived in the guest house, is accused of murdering his parents. Romy, 27, found the bodies and raised the alarm about a dangerous relative. And then there is Tracy, Rob Reiner's adopted daughter, whose courtroom breakdown has become one of the most talked about moments of this case. Each family member has a story, a perspective, and potentially a motive. And each revelation seems to contradict the last, leaving the public and investigators struggling to piece together the truth. But let's step back for a moment. Picture the Brentwood estate, sprawling, opulent, a symbol of Hollywood success. It's the kind of home you'd expect in the pages of architectural magazines, with high ceilings, expansive gardens, and the aura of privilege. Yet, within these walls, a horrific crime unfolded, and the very people who were meant to be safe there became victims of unimaginable violence. There's a chilling irony here. The same home that symbolized protection and family unity became a crime scene. And Romy, walking through those hallways, had to confront not only the physical horror, but the emotional implosion of her family. Imagine seeing the people you love most, lying lifeless in a space that used to be a sanctuary. How does one process such trauma, especially when it implicates someone you grew up with, someone you trusted? From the moment the bodies were discovered, media outlets, social media users, and true crime enthusiasts around the world were captivated. But why does this story grip us so intensely? Partly, it's the Hollywood connection. Everyone wants a glimpse behind the curtain of wealth and fame. But partly, it's the psychological shock. Family murders strike a primal fear. The idea that someone could harm their own parents, siblings, or children breaks a fundamental societal contract. Trust is supposed to exist within the family unit. The Reiner case challenges that assumption in the most devastating way possible. As you follow this story, you will see that appearances can be deceiving, and the truth, when revealed, may be far darker than anyone imagined. Let's talk about Nick Reiner for a moment. Living in the guest house, only steps away from his parents, he became the primary suspect almost immediately. The night of the murder, he was arrested, and law enforcement charged him with 2 counts of first-degree murder. But what drove investigators to this conclusion so quickly? Was it evidence? Witness statements? Or was there something else, something that Romy hinted at when she spoke of a dangerous family member? Nick's position within the household, his proximity to the victims, and his access to the estate make him an obvious focus, but the story doesn't end there. In cases like this, truth is rarely simple, and suspicion can mask deeper secrets. What Nick may have revealed in court is causing shockwaves. Claims that cast his adopted sister, Tracy, in an unthinkable light. Tracy Reiner's involvement, or at least the allegations surrounding her, adds a layer of complexity that almost feels cinematic. Rob's adopted daughter, long seen as part of the family unit, is now the subject of claims that could change everything. During recent court appearances, Tracy reportedly broke down under the weight of testimony and accusations. Imagine the emotional intensity of that moment. Cameras rolling, reporters observing, the public watching, all while the family's darkest secrets are being laid bare. What she said, or didn't say, might be the key to understanding what really happened in that home. But just as importantly, her reaction exposes the human toll of crime, suspicion, and betrayal, not just on victims, but on those who are drawn into the maelstrom of suspicion. And then there is Romy, the daughter who found her parents' bodies. Her statement to authorities about a dangerous family member is one of the most intriguing elements of the case. It suggests awareness of underlying tension or potential danger that had perhaps gone unnoticed by the outside world. What did Romy see, hear, or know that led her to make that cryptic comment? Was it a gut instinct, a factual observation, or something more calculated? The answer to that question could shift the entire narrative, forcing the public and the court to reconsider initial assumptions about culpability. In a story filled with conflicting testimonies, hidden motives, and shocking claims, Romy's insight is a thread that might unravel the tangled web of truth. Beyond the family drama, there's the larger cultural context. Hollywood has seen its share of scandal, betrayal, and tragedy. But even within that environment, the Reiner case stands out. The combination of fame, wealth, familial conflict, and violent death captures the imagination in a way that resonates universally. We are drawn to stories that challenge our expectations, that confront us with uncomfortable questions about trust, morality, and human nature. When someone we think we know commits an unthinkable act, it forces us to examine not only their motives, but our own assumptions about people, family, and loyalty. How well can you truly know someone, even when you share a lifetime together? As this story unfolds over the coming chapters, you will encounter layers of narrative, conflicting accounts, and emotional revelations. Each character, from Nick to Tracy to Romy, offers a different perspective, and each perspective challenges what we thought we knew. You'll hear about the lavish lifestyle of the Reiners, the pressures of growing up in Hollywood, and the interpersonal conflicts that may have simmered beneath the surface. You'll also see the courtroom drama, the moments of confrontation, and the emotional toll of public scrutiny. Through it all, one question persists: who really committed this act, and why? But the introduction to this story cannot end without acknowledging the chilling truth. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any other crime. When those closest to you are implicated in violence, the psychological shock is profound. And in the Reiner case, that betrayal isn't theoretical. It's being played out in real time, under the scrutiny of courts, media, and the public eye. As we dive deeper into this story, the answers will not come easily. Each revelation builds upon the last, forcing us to confront the complexity of human relationships, the corrosive potential of secrets, and the devastating consequences of unchecked conflict. In just a moment, we will move into the first chapter of our deep dive, where we will explore the public image versus the private reality of the Reiner family. You'll see that even families who seem perfect on the surface can hide unimaginable tension, resentment, and secrets. But before we do, ask yourself this: what would you do if someone you trusted completely was capable of a crime beyond comprehension? How far can love, loyalty, and trust survive in the shadow of murder? This is not just a story about Hollywood or wealth. This is a story about human nature, family, and the terrifying unknowns that exist even within our closest relationships. And as we proceed, you'll discover details, twists, and revelations that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the Reiners, and perhaps about family itself. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The Reiners were, by all appearances, a quintessential Hollywood family. Rob Reiner, a man whose name had become synonymous with some of the most iconic films of the 20th century, had built a career that most could only dream of. From directing timeless classics like When Harry Met Sally to producing and acting in a career-spanning body of work, he was admired not just for his creative genius, but for the persona he presented to the world. Intelligent, witty, thoughtful, and above all, a devoted family man. His public image was the kind that inspired admiration and envy in equal measure, the kind that made headlines for awards, not scandals. Michelle Reiner, his wife, was his anchor, the family's quiet heart. Her presence complemented Rob's charisma perfectly, gentle, compassionate, and fiercely protective of her children. Together, they epitomized the kind of family Hollywood likes to showcase in glossy magazines, red carpet photos, and feel-good interviews. But as anyone who studies human nature knows, appearances are often deceiving, and this family, like many, had cracks beneath the polished surface. To truly understand the tragedy that unfolded in Brentwood, you must first understand the family dynamics. Publicly, the Reiners were tight-knit, the kind of family that posed for pictures at awards ceremonies, charity galas, and industry events. They were frequently described as loving and supportive, with Rob often speaking in interviews about the importance of family, respect, and legacy. But behind closed doors, the reality was far more complex. Like many high-profile families, wealth and fame created an environment where expectations were high. Personal conflicts simmered unnoticed, and communication sometimes broke down entirely. Consider Nick Reiner, the Reiner's son. At 32, he had grown up surrounded by privilege, yet his path in life had been anything but straightforward. Reports suggest that Nick lived in the guest house on the estate, a space separate from the main house, but still under the family's watchful eye. His relationship with his parents was reportedly complicated, moments of closeness and affection punctuated by tension, misunderstandings, and possibly resentment. Siblings are often portrayed as allies, yet Nick's relationship with his older sister Romy and adopted sister Tracy may have been marked by rivalry and jealousy that, over time, escalated into conflict. Tracy Reiner, Rob's adopted daughter, had long been a figure of curiosity within and outside the family. Adopted into the Reiner household at a young age, she grew up with the Reiners' biological children, creating a complex dynamic where love, loyalty, and identity intersected in ways that can be difficult to navigate. Courtroom footage from recent hearings has shown Tracy breaking down under questioning, tears streaming down her face as she tried to process the horror that had upended her family. Was this reaction purely emotional, or did it hint at deeper involvement? That question would haunt investigators, the public, and the family itself. Then there's Romy Reiner, the daughter who discovered her parents' bodies. At 27, she was the youngest of the Reiner children and, by many accounts, deeply attached to her mother and father. The trauma of walking into a scene of violence involving those you love cannot be overstated. Her alleged warning to police about a dangerous family member suggests awareness of underlying danger or tension, something that may have gone unnoticed by outsiders. Romy's perspective is crucial because it provides a rare glimpse into the private life of the family, a life that, on the surface, seemed idyllic but was, in truth, fraught with complexity. The Reiners' home in Brentwood symbolized both success and sanctuary. Sprawling gardens, high ceilings, and luxurious interiors painted the picture of a family living the Hollywood dream. Yet, the very estate that represented security and comfort became the setting of one of the most shocking murders in recent celebrity history. It is a stark reminder that wealth and status do not shield anyone from tragedy. In fact, sometimes they amplify the pressures and conflicts that lead to disaster. As we delve deeper into the family's private life, it becomes clear that tensions may have existed for years. Money, inheritance, and the pressures of living up to a family legacy can create fractures between siblings and parents alike. Even in families that appear outwardly loving, jealousy, resentment, and unspoken grievances can fester. Could these underlying issues have played a role in the events that led to Rob and Michelle's deaths? Evidence and testimony from court proceedings suggest that the answer may be yes. Another aspect worth examining is the public perception versus reality of the Reiner family. For decades, they presented a unified front to the world, carefully curating their image for the press and public. Interviews, appearances, and social media posts painted a picture of harmony and happiness. Yet, insiders and leaked anecdotes hint at a more complicated reality. Arguments over finances, disagreements about career choices, and clashes over personal decisions may have created simmering tension. How much of this tension was visible to outsiders, and how much remained hidden behind closed doors? The answer may lie in the details of the investigation and the courtroom revelations that followed. Even in high-functioning families, stressors can accumulate silently. Hollywood families, in particular, live under a microscope, and the pressure to maintain appearances can exacerbate underlying conflicts. Imagine a family dinner where smiles hide simmering anger, where polite conversation masks unspoken resentments. Now imagine that over years, those small fissures grow into cracks capable of causing irreparable damage. That may have been the reality inside the Reiner household, a reality that would culminate in a violent and shocking act of murder. As we examine Nick Reiner's position in the family, it's crucial to consider not just proximity, but also access and opportunity. Living on the estate, he was physically close to his parents at all times. But proximity alone does not explain motive or intent. Investigators and court documents suggest that Nick may have had personal grievances or psychological stressors that contributed to the tragic events of that Sunday. What were those grievances? How did they manifest in everyday life? And crucially, how did other family members perceive his behavior prior to the murder? These are questions that remain partially unanswered but are essential for understanding the full picture. Tracy Reiner's role adds another layer of complexity. As an adopted child, her identity within the family was inherently nuanced. Courtroom breakdowns, emotional testimony, and public speculation have all fueled theories about her involvement, or at least her knowledge of events leading up to the tragedy. How did she navigate the intricate web of familial loyalty, personal relationships, and public scrutiny? Her emotional responses in court suggest a woman torn between grief, fear, and a desire to protect herself or others. Romy's discovery of her parents' bodies and her immediate warning to authorities about a dangerous family member is one of the most compelling pieces of this narrative. It suggests awareness that the perpetrator could be someone close to the family. A realization that transforms the investigation from a standard homicide into a story of familial betrayal. How Romy came to recognize this danger, and why she chose to communicate it in that specific way, remains a point of intense interest for investigators and the public alike. The contrast between public image and private reality is stark in this case. Rob and Michelle Reiner projected warmth, stability, and love, yet the events of that Sunday reveal a reality that was far more complicated. The combination of fame, wealth, and family dynamics created an environment where tension, rivalry, and suspicion could thrive unnoticed until tragedy struck. As we continue into the next chapter, we will explore the discovery of the crime scene in greater detail, examining the horror that Romy encountered and the immediate steps taken by law enforcement. You will see that even the first moments of investigation were fraught with suspense, confusion, and shocking revelations that would set the tone for the courtroom battles to come. It started like any ordinary Sunday morning in Brentwood. The sun rose over manicured lawns, the neighborhood stirring quietly with the soft hum of cars and the distant laughter of children playing. But inside the Reiner estate, what unfolded would become a moment forever etched in horror. Romy Reiner, the youngest of Rob and Michelle Reiner's children, was the first to arrive at the scene that would shatter her life. She walked into the family home, expecting the familiar comfort of her parents' presence, only to be confronted by a scene so shocking it defies simple description. In that instant, everything changed. Imagine stepping into a space you associate with warmth, love, and security, and seeing the people you trust most lying lifeless. For Romy, that image would be seared into memory. She reportedly discovered her father, Rob, and mother, Michelle, stabbed multiple times in the home they had built together. The sheer brutality of the act, the closeness to which it occurred, suggested an intimacy of violence that pointed to someone who knew the victims personally. This was no random attack. Every detail of the scene told a story of familiarity, access, and a chilling disregard for human life. Romy didn't just discover her parents' bodies. She was thrust into a moment of impossible decision-making. What do you do when faced with such horror? Panic? Call the authorities immediately? Or try to process the shock before responding? According to reports, Romy chose the path of urgency. She contacted the police and provided a critical piece of information, a warning about a dangerous family member who, in her view, should be considered a suspect. The arrival of law enforcement only intensified the drama. Officers stepped into the home, met with the chilling reality that two high-profile individuals were dead, and were immediately confronted with the complexity of the family dynamic. Crime scene investigators meticulously documented every detail, taking photographs, collecting evidence, and noting anything that might help unravel the mystery. In cases involving prominent families, the pressure is magnified. The public watches, the media speculates, and every action is scrutinized. Yet, even under these conditions, investigators remained focused on piecing together what had occurred that fateful morning. What made this discovery particularly shocking was not only the violence, but the proximity of the suspect, Nick Reiner, who lived in the guest house on the property. The same night the bodies were discovered, police reportedly arrested Nick, charging him with 2 counts of first-degree murder. From an investigative standpoint, proximity, opportunity, and access make him a primary focus. But as with any complex case, appearances can be deceiving, and the initial arrest opened a floodgate of questions that investigators, the public, and the courtroom would struggle to answer. For Romy, the emotional impact of discovering her parents' deaths cannot be overstated. She reportedly described the scene to authorities, highlighting her fear of a family member she considered dangerous. Her intuition, or knowledge, immediately shifted the investigation from an external threat to one originating from within the family unit. Psychologists often note that in traumatic situations, instincts about danger can be remarkably precise, particularly when someone is familiar with the behaviors and tendencies of potential perpetrators. Romy's statement would guide the investigators, raising red flags that extended beyond the obvious. As officers combed through the estate, they had to reconcile multiple layers of information. The Reiner family, known for their public image of warmth and unity, now presented a narrative fraught with tension, suspicion, and potential betrayal. Each family member, Nick, Tracy, Romy, represented both a key witness and, in some eyes, a possible suspect. The lines between victim and observer, between truth and perception, blurred as investigators navigated the complex web of relationships within the household. The crime scene itself revealed disturbing details. Multiple stab wounds suggested a personal, violent confrontation, indicating anger, intent, or psychological disturbance. Such acts of aggression require proximity, familiarity, and, often, premeditation. The physical evidence began to paint a picture that investigators would later use to piece together the timeline, actions, and possible motivations. Every mark, every position of the bodies, every item displaced or untouched, became a clue in a puzzle that was as emotionally charged as it was legally significant. Public reaction to the discovery was swift and intense. Social media erupted. Fans of Rob Reiner expressed shock and grief, and tabloids speculated endlessly. Headlines screamed about the Reiner family tragedy, drawing attention not just to the crime, but to the extraordinary claim that a family member could be responsible. In cases of celebrity homicides, the line between public interest and sensationalism blurs. But beyond the spectacle, the reality remained stark. A family had been destroyed from within, and the true scope of the horror was only beginning to emerge. Investigators quickly realized that they were dealing with a case of profound complexity. Standard homicide procedures needed to be combined with psychological analysis, family history review, and scrutiny of internal dynamics. The warning from Romy about a dangerous family member had shifted the investigation into uncharted territory. This was no longer a crime scene. It was the epicenter of a psychological and emotional storm that involved multiple family members, each with their own narrative, history, and potential motives. Media coverage, meanwhile, heightened the tension. News outlets reported on Nick's arrest, Tracy's courtroom breakdown, and Romy's role as the initial witness. The story quickly became a global fascination. Not just because of the fame involved, but because of the chilling possibility that someone within a loving family could commit such an act. The dichotomy between public perception and private reality captivated audiences. People could not help but ask themselves, could this happen in their own lives? Could someone they trust implicitly harbor the capacity for violence? In the immediate aftermath, authorities were focused on securing the estate, preserving evidence, and interviewing all family members and staff. The guest house, where Nick lived, was scrutinized for signs of premeditation, planning, or conflict. Every conversation, every piece of forensic evidence, became a potential key to unraveling the mystery. Yet, even with these steps, the emotional weight of the scene remained undeniable. Investigators had to balance procedural detachment with empathy, understanding that witnesses like Romy were processing unimaginable trauma while providing critical information. Psychologists who have commented on the case suggest that the initial moments after discovering a violent act can shape perceptions, influence statements, and even affect memory recall. Romy's identification of a dangerous family member may have been informed by subtle cues, behavioral patterns, or prior interactions that only someone intimately familiar with the household could recognize. Such insight is invaluable in cases where motive and opportunity intersect in ways that are not immediately visible to the outside observer. The police also faced a media challenge. Reporting on the Reiner case required sensitivity to both public interest and the privacy of grieving individuals. Yet leaks and rumors inevitably surfaced, complicating the investigation. Media narratives began to construct competing versions of events, some emphasizing Nick's alleged culpability, others highlighting potential involvement of Tracy or even other peripheral figures. In a high-profile family case, the story evolves in real time, influenced as much by perception as by fact. As the first responders left the scene, the Reiner estate became a symbol of both wealth and vulnerability, a place where luxury could not shield against tragedy. The physical space, a home meant to nurture and protect, had been transformed into a tableau of horror, a stark reminder that proximity, trust, and familiarity can be intertwined with danger in ways that are nearly impossible to predict. As the investigation unfolded over the following days, authorities pieced together timelines, analyzed forensic evidence, and interviewed family members. Each step revealed new questions, contradictions, and possibilities. What was initially believed to be a straightforward homicide quickly evolved into a labyrinth of suspicion, psychological complexity, and family intrigue. The stage was set for courtroom drama, shocking revelations, and the public spectacle of a family grappling with grief, betrayal, and fear. By the time news of the discovery went public, the story had already captured global attention. But the details that would later emerge, the interpersonal conflicts, the family secrets, the courtroom confrontations, would make this case far more complex than anyone could have anticipated. In the weeks and months that followed, each layer peeled back would challenge assumptions, reveal hidden dynamics, and confront everyone involved with the question that lingers in every family tragedy. Who can you truly trust? And just as investigators thought they were beginning to understand the events of that morning, the first shockwaves of courtroom testimony began, bringing forward claims and confessions that no one saw coming. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. In every family tragedy, the first question on everyone's mind is, who had the opportunity, the motive, and the means? In the Reiner case, all eyes quickly turned to Nick Reiner, the 32-year-old son who lived just steps away in the guest house on the Brentwood estate. To outsiders, Nick had grown up in one of Hollywood's most celebrated families, surrounded by wealth, fame, and apparent love. But as investigators and court documents would reveal, appearances can be deceptive, and proximity does not always equal innocence. Nick's life, on the surface, seemed privileged. He had access to the finest schools, the best mentors, and the influence that comes with having a father like Rob Reiner. Yet for some insiders, his relationship with his parents was complex and, at times, strained. While he reportedly shared loving moments with both Rob and Michelle, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Disagreements over independence, personal choices, or expectations may have been present but hidden from public view. In high-profile families, such conflicts are often magnified, and resentment can build silently over years, leaving emotional cracks that can suddenly fracture under pressure. From the moment the bodies were discovered, Nick's position in the household made him a natural person of interest. Investigators noted his proximity, access, and intimate knowledge of the estate. The guest house may have offered him physical separation from his parents, but it also ensured that he was always near. In any investigation, access is a critical factor, and Nick's living arrangements put him squarely within the investigative lens. But proximity alone does not prove guilt, and the unfolding story would reveal just how complicated this narrative truly was. The initial police assessment, informed by Romy's cryptic statement about a dangerous family member, began to consider Nick's behavior, relationships, and psychological state. Court documents later detailed interactions, past conflicts, and potential grievances that could provide a motive. Analysts suggested that while Nick may have appeared outwardly calm or composed, there could have been underlying stressors, frustrations, or unresolved anger that contributed to the events of that fateful Sunday. In family homicides, the interplay between opportunity, motive, and psychological pressure is often decisive. The media quickly seized on Nick as the central figure in the story. Headlines proclaimed the arrest of the son of Hollywood icons, emphasizing the shocking nature of the accusation. Social media buzzed with speculation, theories, and emotional reactions. Some users expressed disbelief, unable to reconcile the image of a privileged Hollywood son with the possibility of such a violent act. Others focused on potential motives, financial disputes, inheritance issues, or long-standing family conflict. Public perception, fueled by partial facts and rumor, added layers of pressure and scrutiny that would accompany Nick throughout the investigation and trial. Court documents and investigative reports began to reveal a nuanced picture. Nick's relationship with his siblings, Tracy and Romy, was layered with both affection and rivalry. Such dynamics are common in families, but in high-pressure environments like the Reiner household, they can become combustible. Disagreements over inheritance, personal decisions, or perceived favoritism can escalate tensions, sometimes to dangerous levels. In this case, investigators were tasked with separating ordinary family conflict from the behaviors and events that might explain a violent act. Nick's psychological profile also became a focal point. Experts who later analyzed the case pointed to signs of stress, potential impulsivity, and possible emotional instability. While none of these factors automatically indicate criminal behavior, they are crucial in understanding how an individual might respond under extreme circumstances. Investigators considered patterns of behavior, historical disputes, and moments of tension that could illuminate why tragedy struck in the way it did. Every detail, every argument, every gesture of frustration was scrutinized for its possible relevance to the events of that Sunday morning. Complicating matters further were the statements of other family members, particularly Romy. Her warning about a dangerous family member added an element of suspicion that shifted focus, forcing investigators to weigh multiple narratives simultaneously. Who was she referring to? Was it Nick, or was she hinting at someone else entirely? This ambiguity would become a recurring theme throughout the investigation and subsequent court proceedings, illustrating the challenge of uncovering truth in a context saturated with emotion, grief, and fear. Nick's arrest later that night formalized the suspicion. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, a serious and high-stakes accusation that carried the weight of life-altering consequences. The arrest itself was executed with precision, as law enforcement sought to maintain safety, preserve evidence, and manage public scrutiny. In high-profile cases, the arrest of a family member not only initiates legal proceedings, but also triggers media frenzy, emotional fallout, and social commentary, all of which can complicate both investigation and perception. The narrative surrounding Nick became a blend of fact, speculation, and emotional resonance. For many, it was almost unthinkable that someone raised in a loving, affluent environment could commit such a violent act. For others, it reinforced the notion that proximity and familiarity can be dangerous, and that even those closest to us are capable of harm under certain circumstances. Psychologists and true crime analysts began dissecting his behavior, searching for clues that could explain his actions. Patterns of isolation, stress, or prior disputes were examined with the intensity of a forensic microscope. Yet, despite the focus on Nick, the story was far from simple. Investigators were aware that family homicides are rarely linear. Emotions, interpersonal dynamics, and hidden conflicts complicate every step of the investigation. For every piece of evidence pointing toward Nick, there were ambiguities, contradictions, and alternative explanations that demanded careful analysis. This complexity would define the narrative of the Reiner case, ensuring that no single conclusion could be drawn hastily, no matter how compelling initial appearances might seem. Media coverage also played a significant role in shaping public perception of Nick. News outlets alternated between painting him as a troubled son overwhelmed by circumstances and as a potential perpetrator capable of unimaginable violence. Social media users speculated on everything from family feuds to psychological instability, often amplifying partial truths into widely circulated narratives. In the digital age, public opinion becomes a force that can influence perception, legal strategy, and the broader cultural conversation surrounding a case. As court proceedings began to unfold, Nick's position in the story became increasingly complex. Allegations, testimonies, and emerging evidence painted a portrait of a man enmeshed in a family tragedy whose details were both deeply personal and publicly compelling. Each revelation in the courtroom added layers to the narrative, raising new questions, challenging assumptions, and keeping both investigators and the public guessing. The tension was palpable, as everyone waited to see whether Nick would accept responsibility, deny involvement, or reveal information that could shift the narrative entirely. Underlying all of this was the fundamental question of motive. Why would Nick allegedly commit such a violent act against the parents who raised him? Was it anger, resentment, mental health struggles, or a combination of factors? Investigators and analysts alike sought to reconstruct the psychological landscape that might explain his actions. They examined familial interactions, financial arrangements, and personal histories, recognizing that in cases like this, understanding the why is as critical as establishing the how. Yet, even as Nick's role dominated headlines and courtrooms, one question loomed larger than any other. Could the full truth be more complicated than the narrative of a son committing murder? Early hints in the investigation and subtle inconsistencies in testimonies suggested that there might be more to the story, involving other family members, hidden tensions, or secrets that had yet to emerge. In other words, while Nick was the immediate suspect, the story was far from fully told. And so, as investigators delved deeper into Nick Reiner's life, relationships, and psychological state, the narrative began to take shape, but not in a linear, predictable way. Each piece of information raised new questions, each testimony hinted at hidden motives, and each revelation had the potential to overturn assumptions. The focus on Nick was essential, but it was only one thread in a complex tapestry of familial relationships, hidden tensions, and shocking possibilities. As the story continued to unfold, one thing became clear. Nick Reiner, the son of Hollywood icons, was not just a suspect. He was a symbol of the complex, sometimes terrifying realities of family, privilege, and trust. And while his position in the investigation was central, the deeper truths of the Reiner family's tragedy were only beginning to emerge. The courtroom was tense, charged with an electricity that only high-profile cases can generate. Cameras clicked, reporters whispered among themselves, and spectators leaned forward, anticipating a glimpse into a family tragedy that had captured the world's attention. In the middle of it all sat Tracy Reiner, Rob Reiner's adopted daughter, a woman whose life had been shaped by fame, family, and now, unimaginable grief. But no one could have predicted the emotional storm that would erupt the moment the proceedings turned toward her. It began subtly. Tracy appeared composed, her demeanor carefully measured, as though she were trying to shield herself from the glare of public scrutiny. She listened intently, nodded when appropriate, and responded to preliminary questions with clarity and poise. But behind the calm exterior was a maelstrom of emotions: fear, grief, confusion, and perhaps something even darker, a sense of being implicated in a narrative that threatened to redefine her life and her family's legacy. Every gesture, every glance, carried weight. To those watching, it was clear that something had shifted beneath the surface, though they could not yet identify it. The first wave came when questioning turned toward the events of the night of Rob and Michelle's deaths. Tracy's hands trembled slightly as she recounted her memories. Her voice, initially steady, began to waver as she described discovering what had happened or learning about it secondhand from her sister Romy and law enforcement. The courtroom fell silent, the tension palpable. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, cameras zoomed in, and the world waited. Then came the moment that would be replayed across media outlets and social platforms. Tracy broke down. Tears streamed down her face. Her composure shattered. She covered her eyes, took deep breaths, and struggled to continue. For anyone who has ever witnessed a human being confront trauma publicly, it was a moment of raw, unfiltered emotion. But it was also a turning point in the narrative. Tracy's breakdown was not just about grief. It was about pressure, about fear, about the weight of allegations that loomed over her. Tracy's emotional state raised immediate questions. Was this breakdown simply grief, or was it tied to the deeper accusations swirling around the family? Rumors had begun to surface that Nick's statements implicated her in some capacity, suggesting a level of involvement or knowledge that no one had anticipated. Even the most seasoned reporters and courtroom analysts recognized that the combination of familial tension, public exposure, and legal scrutiny can create psychological pressure unlike any other. In that moment, Tracy embodied that pressure, her vulnerability magnified by the cameras and the stakes. The court proceedings revealed more than just her emotional fragility. They exposed a fracture within the family itself. Tracy's relationship with Nick, her adopted status, and her position in the family hierarchy all became focal points. Observers noted the subtle dynamics, the way she glanced at Nick during testimony, the hesitant phrasing of her responses, and the brief moments of visible conflict that suggested deeper interpersonal issues. These were not dramatic flourishes for television. They were real human reactions, subtle indicators of history, loyalty, and perhaps fear. Courtroom experts later speculated about the psychological implications of her behavior. Being under such intense scrutiny while dealing with the trauma of losing both parents violently is an extraordinary burden. Add to that the public perception of potential involvement or culpability, and the emotional stakes skyrocket. For Tracy, every word, every reaction could be dissected, interpreted, and used in ways she could not control. The result was a psychological pressure cooker, and her breakdown was both a human response and a strategic flashpoint in the unfolding drama. As questioning continued, Tracy began to provide testimony that, while fragmented by emotion, was revealing. She spoke of family tensions, of dynamics that were not always visible to outsiders, and of moments that hinted at conflicts simmering beneath the surface. Observers noted the contradictions, the pauses, the moments of hesitation, each a potential clue or misdirection. In family cases, testimony is rarely linear. Emotion, fear, and loyalty all influence how information is presented. For investigators and the public alike, these subtleties became critical in interpreting what had happened that night and why. One particularly striking element of her testimony involved her awareness of Romy's warnings. Tracy acknowledged hearing about the dangerous family member comment, and the weight of that acknowledgement was profound. It suggested knowledge, if not complicity, and raised questions about what she knew, when she knew it, and why she had not intervened or come forward sooner. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as she spoke, each word measured against the larger narrative of the Reiner family tragedy. Emotion aside, Tracy's courtroom breakdown also had legal implications. Attorneys on both sides had to navigate the delicate line between human compassion and legal strategy. Defense and prosecution alike recognized that her emotional state could influence perceptions, juror sympathy, and the framing of the case. Every gesture, tear, and falter became evidence not just of grief, but of psychological stress, a lens through which behavior could be interpreted, sometimes favorably, sometimes unfavorably. For the public, Tracy's breakdown was a moment of empathy and speculation. Social media erupted with reactions. Some praised her vulnerability, others questioned her involvement, and still others speculated on the hidden family dynamics that might explain the intensity of her emotional response. This duality, between understanding and suspicion, would become a recurring theme in the case, reflecting the broader tension between human emotion and legal accountability. Tracy's testimony also highlighted the intricate web of family relationships. As an adopted daughter, her position in the family was inherently layered. She had grown up alongside Nick and Romy, forming bonds that were sometimes nurturing, sometimes competitive. Courtroom observers noted the nuanced interactions, the fleeting expressions of concern toward her siblings, the tension when discussing parental relationships, and the subtle hints of past disagreements that might have shaped the present. Each of these moments, while seemingly minor, contributed to a broader understanding of the family dynamic and its potential influence on the tragic events. Perhaps most striking was the ambiguity surrounding her involvement. Tracy's emotional state left room for interpretation. Was she simply a grieving daughter caught in a whirlwind of tragedy, or did her reactions suggest knowledge of events that had yet to be revealed? This ambiguity became a focal point of speculation, both in the courtroom and in the media. Every pause, every sigh, every tear was analyzed for meaning, feeding the public's insatiable curiosity and heightening the tension of the unfolding narrative. The courtroom breakdown also served as a stark reminder of the human cost of high-profile family tragedies. Beyond legal proceedings, beyond media coverage, there are individuals grappling with grief, fear, and uncertainty. For Tracy, every public moment was amplified, every reaction scrutinized, and every word potentially used against her. The emotional stakes were as high as the legal stakes, and the two were inextricably intertwined. As the day wore on, Tracy continued to navigate the courtroom, alternating between composure and emotional vulnerability. Her testimony provided glimpses into the private life of the Reiner family, revealing conflicts, loyalties, and fears that had long remained hidden from public view. The tension between her emotional state and the legal expectations placed upon her created a dramatic, almost cinematic spectacle, one that highlighted the intersection of grief, guilt, and familial complexity. By the end of the proceedings, it was clear that Tracy Reiner's courtroom breakdown was not merely a moment of personal grief. It was a pivotal point in the case, signaling that the Reiner family tragedy was far more complex than initially believed. Her emotional responses, her admissions, and her interactions with other family members provided both clues and questions, deepening the mystery while humanizing the individuals at its center. And yet, even as the courtroom drama unfolded, the question remained, what did Tracy know, and what role, if any, did she play in the events of that fateful Sunday? The answers would slowly emerge, intertwined with testimony, evidence, and the revelations of other family members, but the path to truth was anything but straightforward. The discovery of Rob and Michelle Reiner's bodies was traumatic enough on its own, but the story took an even darker turn with Romy Reiner's revelation to authorities. At just 27 years old, she faced a nightmare scenario few could ever imagine. Walking into the home she had grown up in, she found her parents brutally murdered, and in that moment, she became the first witness, and potentially the most critical informant, in a case that would shock the world. But it was what she said to law enforcement immediately afterward that transformed the investigation, a warning about a dangerous family member. Think about what that phrase implies. In most homicide investigations, initial suspicion often falls on outsiders, robbers, intruders, or anyone without a direct connection to the family. But Romy's words instantly shifted the lens inward, raising the possibility that the perpetrator was someone the Reiners knew intimately, someone with access, knowledge, and personal history with the victims. It's a chilling realization, the idea that danger might reside not in strangers lurking in the shadows, but in someone you call family. And for investigators, that warning became a guiding thread in unraveling the events of that day. Romy's account to police was precise, yet emotionally charged. She reportedly indicated that this family member had long displayed behaviors she considered alarming or threatening, behaviors that, in hindsight, might have signaled the tragedy to come. From subtle signs of aggression to moments of manipulation or deceit, Romy had witnessed patterns that others may have overlooked. In many ways, her insight underscores a critical truth. In families, the signs of potential violence often exist long before tragedy strikes, yet they are easily dismissed or rationalized. The law enforcement response to Romy's revelation was immediate and strategic. Officers recognized the importance of her insight, but also understood the psychological toll on someone in her position. Interviewing a family member in the aftermath of such trauma requires sensitivity, yet also demands clarity. Romy's identification of a potential suspect within the family reframed the entire investigation, forcing police to reconsider initial assumptions and expand the scope of scrutiny. What had appeared to be a straightforward crime scene now required a careful examination of family dynamics, relationships, and possible motives. Public interest in Romy's statement exploded almost immediately. Media outlets speculated endlessly. Who could she have been referring to? Was it Nick, the son who lived in the guest house? Was it Tracy, the adopted daughter who would later have a highly emotional courtroom moment? Or was there someone else entirely, someone outside the immediate circle, but still close enough to warrant suspicion? In the court of public opinion, speculation ran rampant, feeding curiosity and fear alike. Social media amplified these questions, creating an atmosphere of intense scrutiny that would follow the family for months. Psychologists analyzing the case later noted that Romy's identification of a dangerous family member was a profound moment of insight. Trauma can heighten perception, sharpen instincts, and reveal threats that might otherwise go unnoticed. Romy's intimate knowledge of her family gave her a unique perspective, one that was crucial in guiding investigators toward a more accurate understanding of the dynamics at play. Her statement was not only an act of courage, but also an essential piece of the investigative puzzle. As investigators dug deeper, they began to piece together the interpersonal dynamics Romy had alluded to. Family members had a history of tension, jealousy, and unresolved conflict, elements that, while common in many households, took on a more sinister significance when combined with proximity, opportunity, and access. The warning she gave was not made lightly. It was based on years of observation and, perhaps, moments of fear that had long been suppressed. Nick Reiner's role became central in the wake of Romy's revelation. Living in the guest house, he had the means to commit the act and remain close to the victims. But Romy's statement added complexity. While he remained a primary suspect, her warning opened the door to other possibilities, including the notion that multiple family members could have been involved, complicit, or aware of the threat in some capacity. In cases of intra-family violence, such ambiguity is common and deeply unsettling. Court documents later detailed Romy's testimony, emphasizing her role as both witness and informant. She described the behaviors that had caused concern, her emotional reaction to discovering the bodies, and the moments that led her to caution law enforcement. Each statement, while measured and factual, carried immense emotional weight. The investigators' challenge was to separate emotional response from actionable intelligence, a task made all the more difficult by the high-profile nature of the case. The phrase, dangerous family member, also introduced a narrative tension that would ripple throughout the trial. Who exactly did Romy mean? Was it a direct accusation or a warning for investigators to remain vigilant? The ambiguity fueled speculation, court drama, and media frenzy. Analysts pointed out that her statement, while brief, had enormous implications. It suggested awareness of potential violence, insight into family dynamics, and an instinctive understanding of risk that only someone intimately familiar with the household could possess. The psychological dimensions of Romy's revelation are equally important. Being thrust into the role of witness after discovering such trauma can create conflicting emotions: grief, fear, anger, and a sense of responsibility. Romy's ability to articulate her warning, despite these intense emotions, demonstrates both courage and clarity. Yet it also placed her in the center of a storm, exposing her to media scrutiny, public speculation, and the legal pressure of testimony. Investigators had to consider every angle. Was Romy's warning motivated purely by concern for accuracy, or did it reflect underlying family tensions? Could her perception of dangerous behavior be influenced by prior conflicts, rivalries, or misunderstandings. In high-profile cases, every detail must be analyzed carefully, and Romy's statement became a critical lens through which to evaluate motives, timelines, and behavioral patterns. Her revelation also highlighted a disturbing reality. Sometimes, those closest to us possess insights that the rest of the world lacks. Romy's awareness of potential danger underscores the importance of intuition and observation in understanding complex human behavior. Law enforcement and psychologists alike recognized that her statement could not be ignored. It was a compass pointing toward truths that were otherwise obscured by grief, secrecy, and familial complexity. Media coverage of Romy's revelation added another layer of pressure. Headlines focused on the possibility of intra-family violence, speculating about motives and relationships. Social media amplified every nuance, turning the family tragedy into a public spectacle. While such attention can complicate legal proceedings, it also reflects the public's fascination with stories that combine fame, family, and betrayal, a combination as compelling as it is horrifying. Romy's warning would later prove essential in guiding investigators toward further evidence, interviews, and analysis. It reframed the case, transforming it from a shocking murder into a complex exploration of trust, loyalty, and hidden tensions within a prominent family. Her role as the first witness and informant was pivotal, highlighting the delicate balance between emotional response and investigative utility in the aftermath of trauma. And yet, despite her clarity and courage, questions remained. Who exactly was the dangerous family member? Could Romy's insight lead investigators to the full truth, or would the shadow of ambiguity continue to cloud the case? The answers would emerge slowly, tangled with emotional testimony, courtroom confrontations, and shocking revelations that would challenge everyone's assumptions. By the time law enforcement had processed the initial crime scene, the focus had quickly shifted to Nick Reiner. Living on the property in the guest house, he was in the immediate vicinity when Rob and Michelle were brutally murdered. Investigators knew that proximity alone was not proof of guilt, but combined with Romy's cryptic warning about a dangerous family member, Nick became the focal point of the inquiry. The arrest that followed that Sunday night would set the stage for a high-profile legal battle and ignite a media storm that would capture global attention. The arrest was swift and calculated. Police reportedly acted on preliminary evidence, eyewitness statements, and the circumstantial implications of Nick's proximity to the victims. They moved carefully, aware of the media frenzy that surrounded the Reiner family and the potential for both physical and reputational fallout. The goal was clear: secure the suspect, preserve evidence, and prevent any interference while the investigation deepened. Nick's demeanor during the arrest was closely scrutinized by both law enforcement and the media. Initial reports suggested a man shocked, perhaps bewildered, by the rapid escalation of events. But shock and compliance do not equate to innocence, and the authorities approached the arrest with caution, ensuring that every procedural step was documented to withstand the scrutiny of public and judicial examination. High-profile arrests are rarely simple. Every action, every word, can become a point of contention in the courtroom. Following the arrest, the charges were formally laid: 2 counts of first-degree murder. First-degree murder is not only a statement of culpability, but also an assertion of intent and premeditation. For prosecutors, the decision to pursue these charges signaled confidence in the evidence, or at least the direction of their investigation. For the defense, it represented the beginning of a long and complex battle to challenge assumptions, scrutinize evidence, and manage public perception. But what was the evidence that led authorities to charge Nick so quickly? While many details remain under legal seal, investigators disclosed that initial forensic analysis, witness statements, and circumstantial factors pointed toward his involvement. Items collected from the crime scene, including traces of physical interaction, positioning of the bodies, and timelines, were pieced together to create a coherent narrative of the events. Each element of evidence added weight to the charges, painting a picture of proximity, opportunity, and potential motive. One critical factor in high-profile murder investigations is the timeline of events. Authorities worked to reconstruct Nick's movements leading up to and immediately following the murders. This included statements from Romy, neighbors, staff, and security footage from the estate. Investigators sought to understand exactly when he was in certain locations, what interactions he may have had with his parents, and whether his actions aligned with or contradicted patterns of normal behavior. The timeline became a crucial tool for both prosecution and defense, each side seeking to frame it in a way that supported their case. Media coverage of the arrest intensified the scrutiny. Headlines emphasized the shocking nature of the allegation, the son of Hollywood icons accused of murdering both parents. Social media exploded with speculation, conspiracy theories, and analysis of every publicly available detail. The combination of fame, familial betrayal, and violent crime created a narrative that was irresistible to the public. Yet, within this media frenzy, the legal and emotional complexities of the case risked being overshadowed by sensationalism. As the investigation progressed, additional evidence began to emerge. Forensic teams examined the guest house and main house for traces of struggle, DNA evidence, and potential weapons. Investigators looked for inconsistencies in statements, gaps in alibis, and any signs that could clarify the sequence of events. Each new piece of information added layers to an already